Okay, good morning, afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are. Welcome to another SIG CLI meeting. It's March 27th. My name is Maciej and I'll be your host today. So I'm going to start with the announcements. Our SIG CLI got 2 slots during upcoming KubeCon Europe in Barcelona. We will be doing a SIG intro and SIG deep dive. Most probably, the intro will be devoted to introduction to code of kubectl, because I've been approached several times by a lot of people that they would like to have some kind of introduction. So instead of introducing the SIG, we'll actually go and introduce the code behind the SIG. I hope that the recording from that session will be helpful to all the newcomers to the SIG CLI. As for the deep dive, Phil and I agreed that we would like to cover Kustomize, especially that we landed Kustomize as part of kubectl, and there appears to be tons and tons of questions with regards how to use Kustomize, and I'm pretty sure that that will be helpful for others as well. There's also one question that I have to the majority of the folks. There is an option to have face-to-face meeting during Contributor Summit during KubeCon, and I'm wondering whether we are interested in having such a face-to-face.
Yeah, I think that'd be a great idea.
Okay, I'll make sure to sign us up for that one in that case. Okay, moving on to another announcements. Master is open for 1.15 since we released 1.14 just yesterday. So congratulations to all of us for releasing such an amazing 1.14 release. We've had lots of accomplishments, including Kustomize, including plugins in stable, and tons of fixes and improvement to the kubectl. One last final announcement is the API review process is being currently updated. I've linked the document describing the new process in the agenda. Make sure that you know and follow the process whenever you will be introducing any kind of API changes for kubectl. That includes both new commands, old commands, deprecation of commands, as well as flags. So we have to follow that particular process with the API review. So make sure that you are familiar with that.
We've never done anything close to this before. I think there's only like 5 people who can review these things, and they're like Brian, like the most constrained people. Like,
yes,
from a practical standpoint, does this just mean like we don't do work anymore?
No. So although we should be and we will be trying to review those, I'm pretty sure that both Phil and I, we were very, very good at respecting the guidelines that are for moving and deprecating commands and flags, and we haven't had complaints other than why you are removing a flag, but nobody complained about the process itself. So I'm pretty sure that we're in a safe position for that one at least. We just need to ensure that we do follow the rules for deprecating the flags, because that's usually the biggest tension points for when you are dropping support for whatever kind of even almost barely used feature, or whatever, doesn't matter how broken it will be, there always will be people complaining that you are removing the feature, even at the point when you just start deprecating it. So that's I'll see how far I can get with the API review process myself to help people. But yeah, I think that we're in a good position here.
So you and I would be the API reviewers.
For the kubectl, yes.
Okay, that is a practical approach. Yes.
Yeah. Okay, that would be all for the announcements. Yes, kubectl convert is being deprecated.
Yeah.
It's been deprecated for 6 months, right?
Yeah. Well, I mean,
It's been deprecated since 1.13, but based on the guidelines, we can't remove it in 1.15. What we will actually do, and there was a discussion in the mailing list that we can't remove it due to the deprecation policy, which says 3 releases or 12 months, depending on which one's shorter, depending on which one's longer, which means that we need to keep it around until 1.17. But to bypass the problem, because with Convert, it's super special. Convert relies on the internals of kubectl, Kubernetes project. And since at the same time we are moving kubectl out of the core repo, we need to ensure that kubectl works only with the external APIs, which conflicts with what Convert does. And to bypass the problem, we will turn Convert into a plugin. Even though we deprecated it, we will just ensure that it is packaged together until 1.17 and whatnot. And then at some point in time, we will just, when the deprecation passes, we will cut it, and then people will still be able to use Convert, but Convert then will be just a plugin like any other thing. So that's also an important thing for folks to remember. Okay, quick update on the test grid. I was handling the on-call for the past 2 weeks. Thankfully, it was very stable and peaceful. It was probably due to the code freeze and approaching release, so I didn't have that much to do. Let me quickly, that's actually not the document that I wanted to check. Let's see, do we have anyone sign up for the role for the next period? We did not, so I'll probably just sign my name again for another period. Okay. Yeah. Okay, so with that, I think we can move to the main topics in the agenda. And I see that both of them are related to Kustomize. I'm going to pass over to Phil and Jing Fang, most probably. Although I don't see her, but I'm going to pass over to Phil since he is authoring or reviewing both of the caps that are linked in the topic. So go ahead, Phil.
Sure. All right. So the first item is basically a follow-up on secret generator plugins. It has two things kind of mixed in one. The first thing is just like, how would you execute a secret generator using exec, which I think is pretty straightforward. Actually, there's not much in there that's contentious. The bigger question, I think, is just like, how do we, going forward, do plugins that are either executables or Go plugins or whatever it is, but it's like invoking arbitrary code in some form or another that's not restricted to like something we know is safe. How do we enable this in a declarative fashion while ensuring that users who run in untrusted could customize build, they customize build some untrusted source because they don't expect it to do anything and they just kind of want to see like what would happen, what would it output. Don't unintentionally end up running, having it run commands on their system. And so the Ways to address this are two. The first is by default, it's secure. There's nothing that the plugin mechanism can exec. A user has to actually link a plugin or define a path to plugins that can be invoked. And this means, like in the naive case, it's impossible to exploit. The user has to set up their environment in a way that's exploitable. The second case is like, what happens if an organization sets up plugins that may be exploited? So for instance, maybe use gcloud for doing decrypting some secrets, right? And so you just link gcloud in as a plugin, as a convenience to make it simple for your organization. But that command could be exploited by a malicious file to go do something else if you can just run it. So it's safe for the organization, but as long as you're running trusted source, but not untrusted source. And then a user would maybe guess that that's there. So they have no way of knowing that you link gcloud as a plugin, but maybe there's a common pattern in a blog post that says to use it, and they say, "Ooh, that's interesting." And so the way we kind of address that is we say they're disabled by default. You have to provide a flag to basically enable these things. And if you run it without the flag, it will just spit out the commands it was going to run and then exit with a failure. And then that way, it allows organizations basically just set this flag for their CI/CD systems. But users can, if they just run the command without providing the flag, we'll see exactly what it's going to do, and they can go audit those things. And if there's no plugins, it will just succeed. So that is the probably more interesting pieces of this. This introduces plugins in a way that works on all platforms and is pretty similar to the old mechanism that was there. This has been out, it looks like, about 2 weeks. I think most of the comments have been addressed. Looks like you just added a couple.
Yeah, so I read through the cap earlier today. Sorry for being late. My only concerns is around the enable plugins, but because there are two actually concerns. One is with regards to the environment variable. I would strongly discourage using environment variable because it's super easy to ensure that a user has the environment variable set, and that will also hide the fact that you are running the plugins with the plugins enabled. And the other one was like, it is also like moderately simple to have the enable plugins being part of an alias to customize or kubectl. And then that will basically means that whenever I'm running customize or kubectl, the enable plugins will be always there, and I would not get the error. But if you are requiring both enable plugins and plugin path to be on, and the plugin path actually has to match the plugins, which I probably missed from reading the cat, then I think I'm okay with that approach.
There's a plugin path at default, something that's empty, right, by default. So user doesn't have to specify the path and enable. Like they just have to drop the plugins into like /user local customize plugins key value sources or something like that. Mm-hmm. Or I think there's another one that uses a Linux environment variable for where configuration to search for configuration of this.
Yeah, that's the one.
So I think I do think having both where we're trying to optimize here for like the individual who accidentally runs a command against an untrusted source, right? They know it's untrusted and then they accidentally run the command against it, or are unaware that they have plugins installed that are exploitable. So I think just telling users, if you've read the documentation enough to know that you have to specify the flag, or rather the error condition should say before you specify the flag, if you don't specify a flag, only do this for trusted sources and spit it out. So I think the bar we're trying to make harder than is convincing the user to curl into bash. And I think this is significantly harder than convincing a user to curl into bash because they have to download and install or symbolic link files on their local file system and then specify this flag, and it's auditable. Curling into bash, you can't really audit but this should like just have a list of things it's going to execute. The environment variable is a fair point. I put that under in graduation criteria as things to consider, so I'm happy to remove that.
I had some concerns with regards to the naming when it will be part of the kubectl. I was also wondering at some point in time, but I didn't eventually wrote it down, is whether we want to have that enable plugins support in the pure kubectl. But on the other hand, I cannot think of a reason why not having that in the kubectl version of Kustomize. Also, maybe as a follow-up question to that one is how far we want to diverge the default Kustomize from the one supported in kubectl, because I know we are diverging some functionality.
Are we? What have we diverged so far?
I think we have a limited, maybe not the core functionality, but we don't support the full support is not there. I think you can do much more with Kustomize default than the one you can do with kubectl Kustomize. I mean, the subcommands are not present in kubectl.
Yeah, I mean, I think of the imperative workflow as a separate thing. Like the imperative Kustomize commands, I don't consider part of the core. It's really the declarative aspect that I think, because that's the API. I think diverging on imperative commands is fine. Diverging on the declarative stuff is not fine.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Are there still plans to maybe offer the imperative commands as plugins for users that just want to use them under kubectl?
I think there was a point in one of the proposals that I read earlier today about rewriting Kustomize as plugins in kubectl or some parts of it. Not sure if that was this one.
Maybe. There's something related to this, but I don't think it's quite that. Anyway, I can change the name to be from enabled plugins to customized plugins or something like that. The flag should be the same on both. Like we don't want to diverge on that sort of thing. I can remove the thing about the environment variable. I think a lot of this stuff, like if we just leave it out, like the environment variable stuff, like users will either ask for it and have a good reason for it, or they won't, or we'll talk to people at conferences and find out more about that.
Yeah, other than that, other than the security related risk, the proposal sounds good to me overall.
You mean the environment variable specifically, or is there another security related risk?
Yeah, probably the environment variable. The fact that it is always off, etc., is definitely a good approach versus the what we had beforehand. And that will also address the problem of Go plugins that was introduced for secret generation some time ago. Also, I'm wondering whether we are going to support both.
The plan is to support both.
Or the end. Okay.
Go plugins have nice properties when you're doing GitOps and building this into a container. I think the major concerns about Go plugins were, one, like, oh my gosh, like if I develop a plugin marketplace and build a plugin over here and try and use it with this one, it's not going to work. And that's not the intended use case. The intended use case is for organizations to build distributions of Kustomize they build in containers and run as part of their GitOps without forking it. And there's like an actual real organization that wants to do exactly this and is contributing the feature. So that seems proof enough to me that it's valid, and they're willing to maintain it. The other one was, oh my gosh, this doesn't work on Windows. And I think the same comment applies here. Like this is for organizations building platforms with Kustomize in their own distributions, which we're seeing more and more of. Like Airbnb just did this long thing about have to build a platform. Like it seems like every big organization actually ends up needing to build a platform. And so the ability to support the point to integrate our tools into platforms is actually, I think, a first-class problem that we need to be considering. So yeah, this will address the concerns with Go plugins. I think we still want to support Go plugins as an alpha feature with I think it's guarded with a flag of like, oh my God, you know, I know what I'm doing and I accept all panic risks and this is alpha and I'm a maintainer of this feature, sort of level of warranty on the thing. But I do think it'd actually be really interesting because that is a feature developed by an organization trying to build out a platform. And so by virtue of them building on top of the feature they developed, they can probably give us a lot of feedback about how it works for them and how it compares to the exec-based approach. And if they like it, then they can tell us why it's better. And if they don't like it, since they're the maintainers, they can remove it and move on to the exec plugins. But yeah, this addresses that.
Okay. Are there any questions with regards to the secret generators using exec, or basically plugins using exec? Okay, hearing none, so we can now jump to the second one, which is generator and transformer plugins.
All right, this is significantly more ambitious than the secret generator plugins, but relies on a lot of the conventions around plugins in general from the secret generator ones. I think this is, I just talked about like allowing people to build platforms as kind of something we're seeing more and more demand. And I've talked to, it seems like every week I'm talking to someone who's forked control code to build their own platform because it didn't quite do exactly what they needed, but like the core logic was there, right? And knowing people are gonna do this, like how, like I don't think like, we were thinking about plugins in an imperative way of how do we allow marketplaces to develop around people building CRDs and this sort of thing as like the extension first class case. I'm less thinking about like more advanced folks who are like going to build their holistic suite, their PaaS, if you will, from you know the Kubernetes raw genetic material. So this tries to address that case. And it does it by essentially saying all customize is it's a couple functions, types of functions on resource config. So it's not an abstraction layer. It's not a templating mechanism. It's just like, although the mechanics used to implement customize could be fairly used to implement those things, what it does is it reads in some customization file, which is what I'm calling a virtual resource. It's not a real resource that gets applied to the cluster, but it defines, or it's a meta resource, if you will. It defines how other resources are generated or transformed. And so we generalize this and say, okay, you can have essentially generator functions that take in some virtual resource and generate an actual resource from it or multiple resources from that virtual resource. You have transformation functions that set things like labels and annotations and update references to other objects and these sorts of things. And then not included in here is some final canonicalization of like sort order, right? If you take those three things, you basically have customize. Customize has been really targeted on some very, very specific generators and transformers. It's generated secrets and it generates config maps. And it has transformers for about half a dozen different things. And this allows users to do pretty interesting factoring. But when you look at a lot of the stuff in the ecosystem, there's a lot of interesting tools out there that could also serve as generation sources, right? So a Helm chart could be a generator, for instance, where you take a raw Helm chart, or you find a Kubernetes API that has a path to a Helm chart, has some values, a path to values file or values embedded in it, and could generate resources from a Helm chart. This would be using the same mechanics that Customize uses to generate secrets, just with an API defined by the organization, right? And this is inspired by stuff like, I think Airbnb's in where they said, we need higher level abstractions, and they're defining their own in-house tooling for generating those abstractions. Helm charts is proof that there's a need for higher level abstractions. JSONet's proof for this need for higher level abstractions. So we know the ecosystem wants these higher level abstractions. We know that our tools work with resource config only, and we know we're not going to define our own high-level abstractions. Like that is not in scope of the project. We're not going to go define a language. That's kind of what the ecosystem is doing. But how do we make it so the ecosystem can work better with the tools we're building, right? The people who are solving those problems. And like we've said, oh, well, you can pipe them together, right? But we know that like piping isn't the best solution for a number of reasons. It doesn't have great UX. It doesn't work imperatively. If you can't just drop YAML config and update a number of resource files and then have it just work. You need to like update your build and release and deploy scripts, which might live in a different repo now and that sort of stuff. Auditing doesn't work the same way on it, right? Like you want to build, if you're developing tools around linting and auditing of config, then now you have this imperative stuff that's trapped the config in there and you can't really access it. So for these reasons, I think generators make a lot of sense as allowing the abstraction layers, or rather the tools for developing abstractions and this sort of stuff developed by the ecosystem to be plugged in declaratively. Transformers similarly have a natural next step for this, where if folks are generating resources that have names that are changing, that the names themselves are generated, so you can't know ahead of time what the name is because it's based off the resource that gets generated. You need a way of referencing those potentially like we do with secrets. How do we then make sure those references get updated? Well, those are where the transformers come in. Another thing that would be useful for transformers, right, is Istio, for instance, has to inject sidecars. And I think they're use server-side webhooks for this now, which is a decent solution. We've heard, I think, Lyft uses Customize for explicitly this purpose, and I think there's a lot of good reasons for doing it in Customize. One is that it's a lot easier to review and it's a lot easier to audit. And the second is when we do things in Customize, it's actually more centralized for certain platforms, right? You think about a multi-cluster world, means that maybe you're deploying to 6 different clusters, right? And each one of those 6 different clusters has to have those webhooks installed, and they all have to be installed exactly the same. And if one's installed a little differently, then you don't actually have consistency between clusters. Whereas if it's in a centralized place with customization, it gets deployed to every single cluster exactly the same. And so this is kind of inverting the actual impact of like client, if you will, and server, where the client is now running the server as a GitOps, a part of a platform. And so it's now in the server, and the different clusters themselves are there's now many of them, right? So you can't just have a centralized server component. So those are kind of the thoughts that gone into this. Again, it's a lot more ambitious for those reasons. It's intentionally restricted a lot in terms of what it does. There's a lot of comments about why are we being so restricted here. My thought has been that we can always open those up. None of the restrictions in there are going to break backwards compatibility if we lift them, but they would break backwards compatibility if we enforce them later. And we don't have concrete use cases that really necessitate lifting those restrictions yet. So I'd like to hear actual real customers and real users and real folks trying to build platforms attempt to build on the restrictions that are in place. And we can find out like how big of a deal those are, because they will, lifting them would make it much more difficult to know exactly what's going to be produced just by looking at the file. And would make it much easier to introduce conflicts between different plugins. When you install Jenkins plugins, for instance, like you get the version of one that doesn't work with the version of another, and like you just did a simple upgrade of one plugin and like your system's host, and that is a potential here. And the fewer restrictions we have on what these things can do, the easier it is for users to do that. Comments on this?
No, I really like the idea. I was actually thinking whether this would make sense to implement for kubectl itself, but given the current variety of commands and functionality that we support, it would be hard, whereas for Customize, this is like a perfect fit and definitely something that...
Yeah, I was talking to Jeff, and it's like, this is, like a week-long project for Kustomize, right? In terms of code, like it is. Kustomize is always already structured in a way like this. We already have a plugin mechanism. It's literally just wiring the plugin mechanism into the existing structure of Kustomize. So we were fortunate in that aspect.
Oh, that's cool. Are there any questions with regards to transformers and generators?
Is there a lead use case for it, or
Are there leading use cases for this?
yeah, is there like an initial one that's considered, or?
I think like I plan on implementing a Helm chart plugin that allows you to plug in Helm charts directly into kube control in a declarative way. And plan on implementing an Istio one that allows you to inject sidecar containers in a declarative way where they're viewable in diffs ahead of time and auditable during the review process. Those would be the two use cases I'm targeting.
But Helm has things that don't map, like lifecycle hooks from Tiller, for example, right?
Yeah, that's true. I think, well, Helm is like a lot of, so Helm's a platform, right? And specifically the generating abstractions piece is kind of the piece I'm more interested in. I'm less interested in the rest of the platform of Helm. You're right, it'll not be a complete embedding of Helm into kube control. I don't think that's in scope or anything we want to pursue. I can imagine, I think it'd be interesting to me to see like lifecycle hooks and abstractions as charts, as separate layers that are composable, right? You can imagine wanting lifecycle hooks without having to write a Helm chart because you just want to have lifecycle hooks for your declarative config you wrote raw. You can imagine Helm charts without lifecycle hooks. So I think it'd be interesting. I think this is also a step in maybe making it possible to have a la carte options for those.
One of the things I'm finding challenging is when you make one change that many things depend on. So like scaling a stateful set, I've got to change the pod disruption budget. I've got to change the stateful set. I may have to change other things. Is that something where I could do, like, could Kustomize become composable, where there's a meta object I can change and then the transformer can produce new objects that it ingests which have those sort of in them, or?
Yeah, both of those. So this would allow you to do that in two ways. And I think like we are going to learn a lot about what works in terms of usability. Like there's power, and we can do like give you raw power to do like the most insane things possible. Like we can give you go-tos. And then there's like what's understandable. The two ways I can imagine doing what you just described. The first is you define a new virtual API resource, right? And it defines a high level abstraction of whatever it is you're trying to generate. Basically like you create your own templating engine effectively. And then generate the resource config from that. And then now you change one thing and it like generates 3 different resources that all have the right pieces. That would be introducing an abstraction layer, which would potentially reduce visibility into, what the authoring aspects, however, would maybe provide better code reuse. And those would be visible with a diff. The alternative is to do a transformer, right? Where you say this field, you only set one of those fields, right? So an example of something I could imagine, I'm not that familiar with your specific use case, but I think something similar would be like Java heap, like memory for heap and permgen and resource allocations, right? Each one of those things impacts one another, or rather those things have to be, you can configure those collectively in a bad way, right? And you might want to generate the resource allocation by just summing the heap, the memory resource allocation for the container by summing the heap in the permgen and adding some extra in there, whatever your formula is. That's in a single resource a transformer. Then there'd be like multi-resource transformers, right? Where you want to set, there's some relationship between services and the things they select and their labels, and you want to add labels to the selectors for some reason. I don't know, I'm kind of making things up here, but yes, I can imagine you looking at some value set in a service and then updating a pod template as a result of that. You can look at annotations in theory, so you can configure things through annotations and then do cross-cutting changes based on that. Does that answer your question?
Yep, thank you.
Is that something that sounds valuable to you?
Yeah, like I've just recently finished putting a lot of stuff in customized, like 10,000 lines of YAML, and some of those things were pretty repetitive. And I think that you know, the pod disruption budget with stateful set is a good example. The Java config one is another great example where there's a right answer. I'd like to have configured one thing to generate that rather than go and change it 100 times in 10 different overlays. So I can share some of those things explicitly if you need.
Totally. I think there's one case on here which isn't supported and might be useful for you. But if you look, I left a comment that basically says why I put this restriction in place. And there's a specific restriction about what transformers can do, and they can't add or delete objects as it's listed. And the reason I put that in is because it's probably going to impact, if a transformer can add or delete objects and another transformer's like modifying objects, right? You can easily have one where objects get added after another thing modifies them, and that modification doesn't apply to the thing that got added after, or these sorts of things, right? With name suffixes and that sort of stuff specifically. So supporting that would probably, there's a dozen different ways to do it. You can do it with like dependency graphs, acyclic dependency graphs, cyclic dependency, like DAGs. You can do it with different phases. We could define different phases. We could just have a strict ordering and absolute ordering of functions. You could implement reentrant functions where you have to do them multiple times because you do this one, then you do that one, then you do the first one again to make sure it's stuck. But if we had that, I could imagine like you just specify the resource and you annotate, or you just specify deployment and you annotate the deployment with saying, create services for me, please. Right, and then the transformers would go along and like create services that like that send traffic to the things that are annotated. Like I can imagine doing something like that. The way you'd have to do that today is just do a generator that creates both the deployment and the service and call it like a service deployment generator or something.
I think one thing you'll have to watch out for is, you know, we had that earlier discussion about ordering of resources because of the validating webhook and so on. And we had a proposal around annotations, and you know, it'd be nice not to have to do that, but it seemed like a necessary evil. Here you might have the same problem where if we're using maps to do things, then changing one thing in one spot changes the order of the map, and you might get a different result the next time if the order of the transformers is important. Obviously, avoiding the need to have an order would be ideal, but otherwise making it explicit might be the only option.
Totally. And it's just a matter of like, what's the explicit way, right? Like if we just do a straight ordering, like is a DAG better than a straight ordering? Does the ordering need to be absolute? Does it need to include the built-ins as part of the order, or like, should it be phases where one phase before built-ins, another after? Some of the transformers are implicit, like generators are implicitly transformers because they may generate names that have to be wired into places. Where do those come in? Do those need to be explicitly ordered? Like, I totally agree. I think there's just so many decisions about that are dependent on what the actual requirements for the solution are that I'm not sure we want to make them up front. But I'd be excited to read proposals about what the best way of doing this is, and maybe a straight up little ordering is the right way to do it. Or maybe the way I'm kind of leaning is to say, let's just respect the ordering that's in there and make it like, we'll run the transformers in the order that's listed. But that's kind of an alpha supported feature. And as soon as we determine that that is insufficient and we're going to have to do something different because there's two phases, right? Or we have to include built-ins some way or something like that, and including built-ins doesn't work with the current way we express things, then we'll probably just do a release note saying this is being removed without like some long deprecation process or something like that. I can imagine something like that. I don't know, thoughts?
If they become popular, then there's going to be a lot of them. And then if you ever compose things together, then knowing the order is going to be difficult to do. Making it explicit sort of just hands the problem off to the user, which isn't really a great solution. There's no dry run that shows me what would apply in what order. Generally, these things get loaded from YAML into a map, which has no ordering because it's a hash. I think as a user, if I just had a minimum that just said, dry run, I would run A, then B, then C in that order, that I could say, oh, I'd be unhappy with that. I don't know.
How about we could do this? Like the map is an implementation detail for the other stuff. I don't think it's like a, it wasn't, I don't think, done as part of the API. In this case, I think we could just keep it as a list. And in fact, I think that's likely where we'd end up. So yeah, we could just, I think we have audit for plugins anyway. We could probably say, well, we don't even need to do the dry run probably. If we just respect the order that's in that list and do it that way, and we don't commit to doing it that way in the future, but we won't change it. Like we could probably just do that, but not make it part of the API. But maybe put a comment there. I think that would probably be the best thing to do. And the other thing we could do is we could make it part of the API as an alpha feature that we're going to break as soon as there's a better option on the table that isn't backwards compatible with it.
Having the order being an implementation detail is sort of like an alpha feature.
Yeah, exactly. They're the same, two ways of saying the same thing.
Exactly.
One comes with a note you're probably not going to read. But yeah, Don, if I think my main thing is that what you're suggesting probably shouldn't block moving forward with this proposal as is, because it is strictly in addition to what's in here. And I don't think we should block on nailing down that feature before telling someone they can move forward with this.
Yeah, I agree. I think having a goal in mind where either we're never planning to solve it, so get over it, or we're not sure, we're waiting for input. I think making that messaging clear is probably more valuable than trying to nail down the answer.
Oh, perfect. I think the answer is we're not sure. Give us a solution that that we don't have to worry about breaking backwards compatibility on, I think is the answer. But I'll add to the doc. I think it's actually in there, like in the proposal under GA, graduation criteria for GA, there's a consider these things list. And one of the things to consider is introducing ordering, which is what you're suggesting. So that is something we want to consider. And the second is lifting all restrictions around adding or removing resources is another thing we want to consider. And if that should be done as a separate field, perhaps where it's like unsafe or unpredictable transformations. So maybe is that sufficient? I think, given that they're already in the GA, things to consider for GA section.
Yeah, it works for me. I mean, maybe there's two phases. Ones that change things have to run before things that don't change them, and that becomes something we do in a subsequent development phase when the need becomes clear. That'd be fine.
Cool. As soon as you have a real case with real transformations, that arbitrary stuff won't work, create an issue, and then we'll start developing a design doc around that. All right, Mache, yeah, you want to move on? Is there something new?
Yeah. Well, actually, there's anything else other than the stand-ups, and we're almost close to the. I think we're booked for 15 minutes or 50 minutes or so. So I want to let people go on time. So if you have any stand-ups they want to share with the group, that is the time to do it right now. And thanks, Phil, for getting us through both of the caps for customize.
Yeah, sorry for hogging the mic.
No worries.
You can tell me to shut up at any time.
No, that was fine.
Shut up.
Learned a few stuff. Are there any stand-ups? Sean, you want to talk about your progress with the extraction?
Sure. So the kubectl independence is us getting kubectl out of core and into its own repository. We've got 15 remaining imports that we have to remove, which is not really that many. We actually I have 2 PRs out to remove half of those, 7 of them, and they were relatively straightforward PRs. The last couple are going to be dicey and more difficult. Part of what we're doing, as we mentioned before, is making convert a plugin because that has a couple of the dependencies that we need to remove. Kubectl auth reconcile is only one dependency on core Kubernetes to remove, and that actually is it's pretty difficult to do. So I think Juan had started down that path, and actually that's that may end up being the most difficult one. And then there's finally a printers one that I'm working on right now. So we're basically we see some light at the end of the tunnel now. There may even be some PRs in the near future to move some of our packaged kubectl code into staging. We may do that in fact, it may be much easier and much safer to do it in multiple PRs. So we can move different parts of it into staging, and we may be able to get. So we're making progress, and it looks like we're getting close to the end. I guess is the story. Is there any questions? Okay, cool. If you do have any questions, please contact me. If some code moves and you want to know why, it's probably because we're trying to move kubectl out of core.
I have a comment.
Yep.
This is something we've literally been working on for years. Years we've been working on this, and it's going to be huge. It's really going to open up a lot of stuff, and it's going to make our ability to release kube control much, much better. So thank you for everyone involved. There's a lot of people who have been involved in this in 2 years. It has a tendency to burn people out. It's a pretty killer effort. So like Jeff started on it. Juan and Machi have worked on it. David Eads has worked on it. A bunch of people have worked on this. So thank you for carrying across the finish line, Sean.
Yeah. It's the finish line is it's not over the finish line yet, but it's the finish line is in sight.
Awesome, great news. Does anyone else have anything that they want to share with us with regards to their stand-ups or what they have been working for the past 2 weeks? Going once, going twice. Okay. With that, I'm going to close the call for today. Thank you all very much for your time, and see you in 2 weeks. Bye all.